Good
Um,
morning.
Today, we are very honored to have a very distinguished speaker, a very prominent scholar in the field of higher education, but of science policy and science studies as well, in my humble opinion. Professor Marek Kwiek is the director of the Institute for Advanced Studies and a UNESCO chair in institutional research and higher education policy at the University of Poznan in Poland. His research is quantitative studies of science, having an interest in globalization, the academic profession, and international research collaboration. He has an outstanding number of papers. He has published 230 papers and several books. So he has been and continues to be an extremely prolific scholar. And his most recent monograph is titled Changing European Academics, a Comparative Study of Social Stratification, Work Patterns, and Research Productivity, published by Routledge in 2019. He has done several invited seminars in distinguished universities such as in Berkeley, Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, Beijing, Hiroshima, and now Hong Kong. He also has spent some research periods a bit all over the place, but more particularly in North American universities, including the University of Virginia and UC Berkeley. He is a Fulbright New Century Scholar, or was, and a professional visiting scholar at UCL in London. Currently, he's a visiting researcher at the German Center for Higher Education Research and Science Studies in Berlin, which is a very prestigious institution. And he's a principal investigator or country team leader in 25 international research projects, associate editor of higher education, and editorial board manager of several journals. I could continue here for quite some time because Marek has so many accolades that it would be a very long list. So this already gives an idea of how honored we are to have such a distinguished speaker with us. And having said that, and without taking more time from the real content of this seminar, I'll pass the ball to you, Marek, and yeah, the floor is yours.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Sometimes good evening, as in my case. Good morning, as in my case. I'm enormously honored to be back. I had two presentations in Hong Kong a year ago, 2 years ago, in different configurations about different issues, but mostly about academic careers, big data, globalization of science, etc. I'm really honored. I'm honored to be here. I'm happy, and I'm going to start the slideshow, discuss it first, and then just start the presentation, please. Okay, give me a second, please. Okay, I hope it is.
Yeah, you just need to start. Click that button and we'll good to go.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, it's going to be a story about big numbers in academic careers, which is not really an often case in higher education research. And even more so, it's going to be a study which is longitudinal. So we follow scientists for 2 decades, year after year. It's not a sequence of cross-sectional studies like, repeated studies year after year for a few years, but really longitudinal. You take Hugo or you take Marek from the first publication to the last publication or the most recently published one. And the story is about dropping out of science or leaving science or quitting science or basically more or less leaving academia. It's a rare scholarly theme, but still it was already examined mostly in a small scale, mostly in a case study research through interviews, almost exclusively in the US, and based on surveys or interviews, as I said. I'm moving out of the national container towards what I term, well, global higher education profession or global science profession, using the case of 38 OECD countries for methodological reasons, OECD countries work better than really all countries, like 180. So leaving academic science. Just a few introductory questions. Okay. Well, the first question is simple. How global scientific community disappears from science? We know we disappear. We see our colleagues who are somehow not working with us anymore. But so far, I believe we didn't have a chance to know the scale of leaving science. And the scale, I would say, was surprisingly high. Let me give you an example. From most recent cohorts after a decade, only 40% of scientists stay. After 5 years, 1/3 of them disappear. So the scale is enormous, but we wanted to study it across genders. So the most typical question is men versus women, but also across disciplines, and most importantly, perhaps over time. So we studied different cohorts one by one. Say one cohort starting in 2000, another cohort starting publishing in 2010, and we were comparing cohorts between themselves. More general questions are, can we really track scientists over time? Well, for 2 decades. I'm saying it's possible. There are limitations, there are some proxies used, but it's possible. Can we quantify this phenomenon, quantify living in science? I believe we can. And is the study, I would say, truly longitudinal, where by any accounts, if you follow individual people from year to year over time, it's a major characteristic of a longitudinal study, because certainly there are several others, but it is truly longitudinal now, not longitudinal in general sense, which I used for some years. Now it's truly longitudinal. What we are doing, we are testing to an extent traditional narratives with a new global data set. The global data set is Scopus, raw data set provided to us by Elsevier ICSR lab. It's raw data, billions of cells, just raw data. The study uses big numbers. If I'm mentioning two cohorts, cohort 1 is the cohort 2000. Everyone in STEM disciplines globally who started publishing in year 2000 is cohort 2000. And everyone in STEM disciplines who had their first publication ever in 2010, it's about 250,000 scientists, is the cohort 2010. But we also use all cohorts in between to some extent. The studies focus on STEM disciplines for many reasons, which I will discuss as part of limitations. So science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine. What are these traditional narratives on nutrition? Well, they're basically true. We can summarize them as follows. Women tend to disappear from academia earlier than men. And second, women tend to disappear in higher proportions than men. These narratives or big stories are based on previous literature, mostly interviews and mostly surveys, and in almost 100% coming from the US. This is a different story because it takes the world somehow, or OECD world, into account. Well, we test some opportunities that global bibliometric datasets open when we want to study scientific careers. I've been studying the academic profession for maybe 15 years, taking part in all possible cross-national comparative surveys in the past 10 years. So I know the limitations of surveys, I know the limitations of interviews. Now I'm trying to summarize the limitations of, well, global dataset, in this case Scopus, but someone else could do Web of Science or other global datasets. Not so easy, but with Web of Science, it's also possible. Just the last slide of introduction. Why it is possible to do it today? Because we have access to digital databases. Previously, this type of longitudinal studies, multi-country studies, was just not possible. So the data sets are difficult to reach, are expensive to run, sometimes temporary. We have access and we lose access. Working with the big data is time consuming. It requires people around you, so it's teamwork, but still it's something new. And when we have new data, I believe we can test traditional conceptual frameworks in the context of new data and see what works, what doesn't work, what used to work and works not anymore. Well, I'm talking about scientists, but it's also about academia. 90% of all publications or more come from academia. So it's a story about leaving academia, leaving academic profession, even though I'm saying general using the data, scientists and the science sector. We are following hundreds of thousands of individual careers. We produce these careers, we show the details, analyze the details, and follow individuals over time. Our findings, major point. You can see Łukasz Szymula on the right, my, well, absolutely stellar doctoral student who was dealing with the data issue and collaborating with ICSR lab to get big data and provide big data analytics. So you can see the preprint of this paper available until recently. Just major points to give you a, well, teaser somehow. Well, our survival analysis, which I'll discuss in a second, shows that attrition in science is ever less gendered. So the big difference between men and women leaving science, we know from the past, from interviews and analysis and surveys and analysis, this gender difference is getting smaller. And in many disciplines, it's just disappearing. This is one finding. Also, regression models which we run is showing that although we think that, well, only publication quality matters, our models show that publication quantity is also enormously consequential for careers. Consequential in terms staying in science or leaving science, stopping publishing at all. So there's a combination of quantity and quality which matters for the persistence of academic careers. Again, just a scale of leaving science. 1/3 of scientists globally leave science after 5 years and a half after 10 years. Now, with most recent cohorts, it's even 60% after 10 years. We can see there are people come and go. They stop publishing, mostly leaving STEM departments and faculties. Well, what is perhaps most important as a finding also, today, there are equal odds to stay in science today, meaning for most recent cohorts. The odds are almost equal, which is really surprising. With some disciplinary variations, I will discuss the big four, which is computing, mathematics, which is engineering, but also physics and astronomy, the big four versus the rest. There's tremendous difference by keep the results for a second away from you. Well, it's certainly a scholarly theme. It's dropping science, it's leaving science, it's exiting from science, dropping out of science. All possible keywords work, but the idea was basically studied through such concepts as faculty departure intentions. There's no way to really follow and to say how you're leaving when you stop publishing. So it was faculty turnover, faculty departure intentions in the case of the US. And as I said, traditionally, small scale studies were used, surveys were used, and interviews, mostly. What we know, we know from single institutions, mostly. What we know about the US. And I'm basically against the idea that what we know about the US is exactly what we know about the academic profession. It's mostly the case because most theoretical studies in the past 3-4 decades were produced in the US, but still now the data are available about the whole world, say Europe as a whole, or OECD countries as a whole. So we can move beyond this USA centrism right now and show the differences, well, I would say globally. Why we quit science? Well, work-life balance doesn't work. Low job security, low salaries, all those of different concerns, like colleagues' concerns, especially for women scientists, but also discrimination. And perhaps most importantly, thinking about traditional theories, hostile or chilly climates. especially in STEM disciplines. So women tend not to be welcome in STEM disciplines, in STEM institutes, faculties, and departments. And we know it again from surveys, and we know it from interviews. The last confirmation comes from Spoon and Katie Spoon and colleagues, Aaron and colleagues from Colorado, where my doctoral student was for 6 months. They confirmed the climate. The climate is still the most important thing why women leave science. But this is a larger theme. Now, this research very briefly. We move towards disciplines and we move away from single countries. We move to study this phenomenon over time. So we take cohorts and follow different cohorts over time between 1 decade and 2 decades. So basically we have 11 large non-overlapping cohort. If Marek is one cohort, first publication 2000 whatever, he enters this cohort and moves over time within this cohort. So they are generally non-overlapping. This study is longitudinal, as I said. The same scientists are tracked over time, exactly the same. And we have a wealth of micro level data. So interestingly, when we use big data analytics, our access to micro data increases substantially. We can know more and more, and a lot of our data are like lifetime approximations, like an individual where he's publishing or she lifetime, in what type of journals, or what are the bottom journals or top journals, more or less, what is their team size generally, what is their collaboration rate, international collaboration rate. All these micro level data are not, I wouldn't say easily, but are available if you compute the data at our disposals. Well, more technically speaking, we use survival analysis. So leaving science is like an event. You stop publishing and you never publish again for years. And the best analysis to study events is survival analysis. How long you survive once you enter the scientific profession, meaning you start publishing, when you stop and you do it never again. So it's an event. Life in this approach is like a sequence of scholarly, well, I would say publishing events, from the first publication ever, any type, onwards. We compute probabilities of occurrence of this event. This event is stopping publishing. And we compute probabilities for every subsequent year of being in science. There are less publications ever, and this means stopping publishing. Well, very briefly, theories which come immediately to mind when you think about leaving science. Well, major theories are about women, or focus on women, rather than on academic profession or scientists in general, academics in general. It's chilly climate theory, we know it. There is hostile or somehow unwelcoming work environment in STEM fields. So women don't really feel welcome in those fields, and there are studies for spanning at least for 3 decades about the chilly climate. And the other theory is also mostly about women, or exclusively about women, as we know it, leaky pipeline theory. There is loss of women across academic career pipeline at every stage. I will be showing to you today that there are losses of talent of both genders. We are leaving science in large, massive proportions all the time, especially recently. So these are just references to weak theories, and we know the theories, they are based on small-scale data. These larger ideas are based on interviews and surveys. None of them were produced using big data. So we are just testing or revisiting these theories, not getting into details, using large data sets. And this is a data set. Very simply, we have population, we have cohort 2000, major cohort, and cohort 2010, and all cohorts in between, but basically these two. These are about 400,000 individual scientists with micro level data, who produced about 5 million publications until today, more or less. This is the story. For every scientist, we have country affiliation, we have gender, male or female only, we have discipline, etc., etc. This is how we constructed the final population for this study. Just to give you a preview of what you can have using big data. Our data set have, as I told you, about 400,000 individuals. And what we know relatively easily about individual, you can see IDs on the left. Let us say this red ID, male scientist defined as working in medicine, with country affiliation in Germany, not working in one of top 200 research intensive institutions globally, starting publishing in 2000, his cohort 2000, so this is automatic, but also who finished publishing in 2016. He stopped publishing in the past 6 years. He published nothing. We know his overall collaboration rate. 1/3 of his publications were written in collaboration in an international company. We know where he publishes, mostly in pretty good journals, in the Scopus classification of journals, stratification of journals. 70 percentile 7 to 72 is pretty high out of 1 to 99. So pretty good journals. Small team size from medicine, just two collaborators on average lifetime, very highly cited, twice the global average. You can see comparing the others here, very highly cited, and also the offer of 30 research articles. This is what we compute from the data for everyone. So this is a micro level data that we use. Well, more technically, we follow scientists, women on the left and men on the right, over time, and we see how they disappear or stop publishing. You can see in red here, after 10 years, the probability to stay in science for women is less than 50%. Half of them just disappear, never publish again. In Scopus, it's a limitation. But we assume for STEM, Scopus works pretty fine. And for men, this probability is considerably higher. So we compute these probabilities for every year, like 19 years, and we see the probabilities are different for men and women. But this is for the old cohort. This is a cohort which started publishing a quarter of a century ago. We did it for the more recent cohorts, and you see the difference. And the difference is graphically here. When you look at the left, you have the 2000 cohort. On the right, you have 2010 cohort, which is much younger. And when you look at men and women, you can see that the probability of staying for women for this cohort was always lower. The chances to leave, in other words, were always higher. This is the old cohort. But when you look at younger people, there's basically no difference. And you can see it on the right. The probabilities computed for this event, which is leaving science, is exactly the same. So we have, well, scientists and not really men and women. It makes a hell of a difference. With every new cohort, the chances for the two genders to stay in science are more and more close to each other. But still there are cross-disciplinary variations. I wanted to show just in one word how is it going in those disciplines like biochemistry, where there is a lot of women. Half of biochemists are women. You can see 48%. And when you look at physics, where the number and the percentage of women is very small, the percentage is 15%, you immediately see that when there is a lot of people and a lot of women, women tend to be more prone to be either kept out of science, kicked out of science, or just leave science. But in those mathematized strong areas where the number and percentage of women is small, like physics, mathematics, computing, astronomy, the chances are identical. The survival curves are just overlapping or nearly identical. And this is an interesting finding, because when we say science, there are different disciplines behind it. And when we say different time periods, there are differences between different cohorts. So just one of the explanations that could be, women in those very hard mathematized sciences like physics, computing, mathematics, astronomy are in high minority, 15%. So they act as counter referred it to companies as tokens, exemplary figures, representatives of women. They are extremely talented from the very beginning, extremely hardworking from the beginning. As you can see in this picture, there are just 4 women, say, and dozens of men around. So this is one of possible explanations. Individuals, in this case, women, are highly competitive from the very beginning because they are working in heavily male-dominated environments. So, as you can see here, no difference in attrition in physics as opposed to biochemistry. We tried different approaches. I'm not discussing it in detail here, but whatever approach we take, the differences for the old cohort top are visible, and the differences from more recent cohort 2010 are invisible. So those differences disappear. If you think about panel D, which is kernel density curve, showing when those who left actually left after how many years, you see that there's basically 4 years, 6 years, which is a top period for both men and women, and gender differences are marginal, just marginal. Well, so I'm summarizing it as in one idea: time matters. Attrition patterns become less gendered over time. And I would say it's a fundamental transformation when you used to be thinking that women tend to different in larger proportions generally and much earlier generally. We are thinking like this for minimum 3 decades because we had interviews and we had surveys and with all type of American data which were showing this pattern. We believe it. So there are many policy implications of the past findings, including various policy interventions at the level of states and institutions, and possibly there are some policy implications of what we are showing. In some areas it is needed, in other areas attrition is exactly the same. So some findings which were found for older cohorts may just not work for younger cohorts. We have some preconceptions about what's going on in academic profession, well, in science profession, but also in academic profession in more strict terms, and you have past preconceptions about what's going on without the data. So what I'm saying, time in science matters. We have different environment and different cohorts experience the attrition differently. It's a danger to a different extent, and it's perhaps not so much gender sensitive danger. It's also not really a danger. Some people are kicked out of science, but some people leave science because they want voluntarily. I will discuss it in a second. Just one word. Well, the whole story is global in nature. We're not really interested in differences between countries because it doesn't make sense if we have 40 countries. But if anyone is interested, we prepared an interactive dashboard in which you can take any discipline, any gender, cohort, one of 11 cohorts, time, how many years after starting publishing, and the attrition rate per country. To give an example, which is in red here, and to see differences in career prospects. Well, in Europe, 40% of women in Germany and Austria only stay in medical sciences from this cohort, as opposed to 90% in Estonia and Lithuania. You see the differences even when you plan your career. If your chances to be slashed are 60% over a decade, or if your chances to be slashed are just 10%. This is one-time snapshot which I'm not really using in the paper. It's additional because we computed the data also for all countries. So you can see the difference. Poland is a country generally with relatively low attrition rates. Once you enter, you continue publishing. But if you look at Germany or at the UK, much higher attrition rate for both men and women. Well, very briefly, logistic analysis, then conclusions, and then final words. We were trying to move beyond one dimension like discipline and gender towards many dimensions. All those micro-level data were used in our regression model. What was the success? The success was to enter this 30% who stays after 20 years, this class of 30%. Or the success was to enter this class of 40% who stay in another cohort in science. What are the predictors of success? Well, we are thinking high research productivity should work. If you're highly productive, your chances to stay in science are higher, or in other words, to publish in the following year are higher. When you publish high impact journals, your chances are higher. Also, we're thinking when you are a male, your chances to stay in science are higher or much higher. This is traditional view based on literature. Well, I present just two results for one cohort and to the other cohort. So one cohort is cohort 2000 and the cohort 2010 is another. And what is the message? You can see major variables used in these regressions. Well, gender, then well, more or less citations, it's field weighted citation impact for 4 years, international collaboration rate. We thought it is important. Scholarly output, public articles only, lifetime, the type of journals where scientists are publishing, using Scopus average publication journal percentile from 1 to 99, from bottom to top journals. And team size, we're thinking team size works. More people around, more publications, combined together makes people stay longer in science. But there's just one message. Publication number matters. When you look at the scholarly output variable, this is what is perhaps the most important predictor of publishing in the following year. Well, somehow unexpectedly, from these big logistic regression analysis, gender really matters. So when we have a lot of different variables, being male doesn't really matter, doesn't increase the chances to stay in science. One publication increases the chances to be publishing in the following year by about 20% in a number of disciplines. And when we look at the second cohort, the role of the number of publications is even higher. In a number of disciplines, you can see here agri, envir, immunology, mathematics, one more publication increases the chances by as much as 40%. Generally, it's 20%, but there are exceptions. And again, gender doesn't matter. Mostly, citations don't matter for continuing careers, but what matters is also publication types, meaning journals. So average publication journal percentile somehow works. It's not as strong as we were thinking, but still an increase of 1 unit is 1% increase. So when you massively publish, say, in top journals, your chances increase by, say, 70 or 90% to stay in science. So quantity matters and also quality matters. What doesn't matter, looks like, it's gender and it's citations. Citations doesn't really increase your chances, and being male also doesn't increase your chances. So, well, surprises. We have new data and we have traditional literature. The role of gender is much smaller than expected in the presence of other variables. In this multi-dimensional account, being male is not really statistically important. It's important to know it. Also interesting, quantity, not so much quality, but quantity of publications is more important, is important. Looks like it's more important than quality, except for big differences in publishing types, heavily top journals as opposed to heavily bottom journals. But overall, quality matters. So higher productivity generally is correlated with retention in science. You want to stay in science, you produce more. Citations don't look really as important as we were thinking. Well, now a few methodological takeaways. We do in Poznan a lot of national studies. We combine bibliometric data, we merge them with administrative data and biographical data, because we have this type of data sets for Poland. So we do a lot of national studies and we do quite a few global studies, and we can see the difference. For instance, globally, we don't have this biographical information which you have for Poland or for the US or for Norway. Gender, we have to compute it. Year of birth, not really. We use first publication date, which is publishing experience, and not really age. We don't have employment history, which you have for Poland, or promotions, which you have for the US in academic analytics database. This is not available. Also, we have access only to publishing only scientist indexing scopus globally. Nationally, we have everyone from the register. We have access to registers. Globally, we have only publishers. It's a huge limitation, which I will come back to in a second. Well, ontologically, but also somehow methodologically, but perhaps most of all ontologically, we have real scientists with national IDs in our registries. Person, Marek, person ID in Poland, his ID is as follows, versus Scopus offer IDs. Ontologically, it's something else. We have national, perfect national data, and we have somehow inferred or proxied data working globally. But we believe the trade-offs are necessary if we want, in this case, to test new data and apply them to old ideas, as in the case of attrition. But we do studies about classes, productivity classes and productivity. We do studies global about aging in science. So in all those type of studies, we want to move beyond national analytical containers, not Poland or European countries or Poland versus Germany or whatever. We move towards disciplines. We want to say mathematicians as opposed to chemists. You have seen the differences by gender rather than Polish mathematicians versus, I don't know, German mathematicians, because the numbers are too small. When we focus on countries and in age and disciplines, the numbers are extremely small. It just doesn't make sense. We want to do a global study. Finally, limitations and conclusions, 2 slides. I have a strong feeling that there are no other ways to study science or scientists longitudinally today, except for bibliometric datasets with publications and citations. So the only way to think longitudinally and to think globally is to use this type of data source. I can't see anything, well, even approaching this level of usefulness. However, there are limitations. There is a price to be paid, like, you know, the price. It's language, English, it's STEM rather than the whole academic production. It's mostly Anglo-Saxon bias. It's articles on. There are a number of traditional limitations, but also there are new limitations. And in our case, in this research, they are as follows. We need to say this. Leading science as stopping publishing. Well, it's one of the possible approaches caused by access to data. There are other roles which we just dismiss. Teaching, we cannot verify it globally. Administration, there's no way to see if somehow stopped doing administration globally, or is doing or is not doing. So those ideas of being in science or being out of science are clearly, well, slippery. We cut it and make it more slippery. We say no more publishing means no more in science, not publishing anymore, not doing science anymore. Well, we all do mentoring, we do reviewing grant proposals, we do editing journals, and it's not visible in this global approach. Why? Because there's no data at the moment. We may be able to do it soon, but not now. So this is a clear limitation which always has to be stressed. Active participation in science through publishing only. All other roles, whatever we have, are not visible at all. When I'm saying women leave science and men leave science, it only means they stop publishing and they publish never again, which is one of ways to be looking in academia. But we know also from Hugo studies that for young people, publishing is everything. If we check Hugo's reviews of surveys, what young PhDs think, they think publications are more important for careers. So this is somehow important to remember, especially that we focus on STEM. Another limitation. We are not able to do any comparable study for humanities and social sciences. We are doing right now a selection of social science. We do psychology. We're doing productivity study. We do psychology. We do management, and we do economics, econometrics, etc. These are just very narrow strands of social sciences, science, and not the humanities, because books count, and we don't have access to metadata about books like citations, and we can't produce these narrative histories, lifetime histories of scientists who work, or academics who work in humanities. It's just impossible. So this is a huge limitation. I'm saying science, but it's just STEM: science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine. What we do, we test the power of outsiders' data. We know the data are curated using hundreds of millions of dollars. They are reliable. They are nicely structured. I call them all the Scopus types. There may be other approaches using Web of Science, but it's much more complicated. If you want, I will tell you why. Final words, just very short slides. When we want to move beyond countries, in this case, beyond the US, and we want to know something about what's going on with scientists globally, we need a longitudinal approach. So year after year after year for 2 decades, a quarter of a century, and we need global data sets. We see the transformations going on today. We see differences between cohorts. What was valid 20 years ago for this cohort is not valid for recent cohorts. Things are changing rapidly. We also need to remember that there are new ones changing within disciplines. We use 16 disciplines, but we could have been using this number of data, lower level subdisciplines, like 150, or even topics. But, well, we started with, pretty large scale picture, but it's feasible having this type of data for hundreds of thousands of scientists. Well, finally, attrition in science means different things for men and different things for women in different disciplines. This is important. There's no one single story. But also, attrition works differently for different cohorts. The story 15 years ago is not the story for the youngest today. So we enter at some point the scientific workforce, and we leave it in different percentages, at different scale, depending on time. So time in science matters enormously, but you can study time only when you have longitudinal data. Otherwise, when we do interviews, when we do one-time approaches, cross-sectional studies, it's just point in time. When you want to look over years, well, we need to use data sets which are longitudinal. Finally, as I told you in the very beginning, gender differences in attrition are getting smaller with each successive cohort. These results are only for attrition. I'm not talking about gender differences in science in general, or women in science in general. It's just attrition. Once you start publishing, you continue publishing, and what are the differences? They are smaller and smaller. In some areas are even disappearing. For all of us, and this is important, attrition is very high. It's really high, and it's still on the rise for all of us, for both genders. So when we imagine that 60% of scientists disappear after a decade, this is something, just 1 decade, and 60% just gone. So attrition is a general issue, I would say, for all of us. And it means that there are connections with, perhaps, I would say, job attractiveness, which I studied for 2 decades, working conditions. I was in so many projects about working conditions of academics in the past almost 20 years. So it matters. Career opportunities increasingly matter, because in my view, attrition is just too high and it's on the rise. This is a loss of talent. It's not a loss of women. It's a loss of both men and women, massive. So, well, who can help us? Certainly qualitative studies, qualitative research can help. Why we massively leave science? Why we massively leave academia? Why we massively leave research? With all those sub-definitions, whatever it means, why is it happening? So we produce a big data analysis with some big pictures, but still to know why it happens. Is it pull factors? So the outside is so interesting that people leave science. They just go outside. or is it kicking out, involuntary leaving science? Like you can't stand the pressure, or you can't stand, well, low salaries or whatever, and you leave. So there are both push factors and pull factors. We don't know which combination of them works for which disciplines. It's different in economics, and it's different in computing, and it's different in humanities, where there's basically nowhere to leave. But we are not studying humanities here. Generally, the why question, this is the question with which I wanted to finish. I believe, Hugo, it's exactly 40 minutes, so it's time to stop. Thank you so much. I'm just shutting down the screen, and I open to any ideas, any comments you may have at this point. Let me stop sharing the screen and come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marek. You might have to bring again the PPT back, because
I will, if necessary. I will.
Someone
Definitely.
in the audience might want to see the numbers again to kind of support some of the comments or questions that they might have.
Definitely.
I have questions of my own, but I have to fulfill my duties as a chair and kind of defer to the audience first. So if possible, I will come back if I have time with my own questions. Let me start with the first question by Yusuf. Yusuf, do you want to ask the question yourself?
Okay, can you hear me well?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Hello, Yusuf.
Okay, it's very nice to see you again on Zoom, Professor Marek. I've been following your work for a long time. Well, I have to admit, my question is answered at the end when you said new limitations slide. I was asking about, can your method of analysis separate those who stayed in academia as a professor but stopped publishing? And you said you can only follow it if they keep on publishing. Fair enough, because the bibliometric data sets have these limitations. Maybe I add one more question to this. What is your cutoff point then? How do you define, like, is it like after 3 years, if they do not publish, then we decide they drop out? Because, for example, 1 year or 2 years sometimes may not be enough. Maybe people take a break or they start a new project, and then in those years, no publications. So I'll be happy to hear your thoughts. Thank you very much.
Joseph, that's an excellent question, and we're digging into this matter deeply, really deeply. So we produce for all cohorts kind of frequency analysis, which we're showing, okay, 80% of scientists produce something every year. Or between 80 and 90%, depending on discipline. There is some 70% of scientists who produced a paper every second year or something. And putting it all together, we decided that, well, first, once you enter the publishing cohort, you publish, and for the vast majority of people, you just stop publishing. It's publishing never again. So it's not we never apply this, say, 3-year window. Maybe they publish after 5 years. No, they never published again, never. So this is how the cohorts were produced. For the past 3 years, we took what was termed the right census observations. So we use, for various reasons, those observations, but we don't apply them in computations of probabilities. So we assume, okay, frequencies show that after 5 years, in year 4, generally these people have to be treated differently. So all those probabilities are done for those publishing until 1919, even though we have full data until 2022. But anyway, just in case, we use only uncensored observations. So these people never publish again, truly never. And when you mentioned this idea of limitations, there are so many other limitations I will be happy to discuss, but maybe if you have more time, these are more details like disciplines, also gender, also location, affiliation, also, well, there are various limitations. At the end, I can discuss it in more details. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very clear.
All right. Thank you very much. Next question by Li Yu. Li Yu, do you want to ask the question yourself?
Okay. Thank you, Professor Hugo. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Yes,
Thank
we
you.
can hear you.
Okay, Professor Kwiek, your presentation is really intriguing, and I learned a lot. Thank you. And I have a question about the possibly missing variable problem, because in your study, I don't see the very rich set of individual and institutional variables. So I'm wondering if it could be the case that the tenure track professors are more likely to leave because they do not pass the tenure evaluation. So maybe there are some academic career characteristics that could be missing. That's one question. Another question is that I'm also wondering about where did they go if they leave the academia? Whether they have a very successful startup, so they have more parties to go, or maybe they are very unfortunate, so they have to drop out. Thank you.
Yeah, yes. Thank you so much. About the institutional type data, it's relatively easy to produce this type of data for Europe, but not globally. For Europe, we have this ETER database for 3,000 institutions. We have numbers of students, numbers of academics, research intensity, all types of this data. So in the future, I'm going to be focused somehow on Europe as opposed to East Asia and as opposed to US, rather than doing, well, global studies. Some make sense, some make less sense. So when we think about institutions, indeed, if we focus on the US and we use, well, academic analytics data sets, we have all promotion data, all, employment histories. When I do Polish studies, I also have full employment history, all degrees, PhD, habilitation, professorship, all types of this data. And I have full data about institutions. Globally, it's not possible. But when we produce kernel density plots, when people disappear from science, we can see that there is a peak at year 4 and 5, which is basically after 1-2 years, the last 1-2 years after PhD, and then after year 10, there is quite a flat rate, which means that leaving science is much less frequent. Certainly, it's fantastic to do national level studies like the US or Poland. We know all the details about everyone in surprising scale. But if you work globally, we are trying to attach these institutional level variables. Say, the only one which I used in regression analysis was, are you in top 200 research intensity globally, top 200? We produce the list. It's not university, it's just institution, because we work with all institutions. So top intensive in terms of how many papers were produced in the past 5 years globally or not. So it's top versus rest. Basically, we had no other institutional level variables at the moment. What we are doing right now as we speak, we will be combining surveys with institutional level data about beliefs and feelings and, how do you feel in your institution, what is your institutional satisfaction, whatever, with global data on publications and citations. So we are able somehow to combine it, but not really now. It's about the future. And the second question was, where do they go? Yes. At the moment, we are using this type of data sets for which we are not able to say where they leave. We just know they stop publishing for years. So they can go to companies, to startups, they can leave their profession altogether. It can be, somehow knowledge intensive type of work, but it doesn't have to be. They can go, well, people like us can go to education and stay in education. All we can know is they no longer publish. This is a limitation, certainly. When we really want to follow this idea closer, we do surveys. Surveys can be only global in this case. We trace people who left as long as they keep the same email, but email addresses are usually institutional. So the numbers would be limited. Once you stop publish, you leave your institutional email unless you are in the teaching stuff. So there are some options to do, but they are pretty complicated at the moment. We are only testing big data sets at the moment. We're not trying to answer all questions, but it's important. There are studies which show People go somewhere, people don't go to this, and they are based on surveys, especially in the US. It's not only studying leaving intentions, but it's also studying real departure decisions. There's a recent study about departure decisions. Where did you go based on the survey? And to accompany just intentions to leave. But globally at the moment, it's not possible.
All right, let's keep the ball rolling. Next question by Jason.
Well, thank you, Marek. This was really fascinating. I just have a question about like mobility. People move a lot. They change institution. They change sometimes even discipline, and then country. All these things, and also they go to the private sector. So whether this mobility effect will be considered in the analysis. Also, when you do the cross-country comparison, so you consider top 200 university or not. So that would be my first question. I just have a small second question. You mentioned this is not a cross-country comparison, but what's interesting, attrition rate is much higher in the smaller system like Estonia, and then much lower in big system, US and Germany. Is it possible to interpret they have a much more chances, opportunities in non-academic sector? They have a big industry, and then they can find the jobs without publishing anything. I wonder, how you think about the result. Yeah.
Yes, Jason, thank you. These are fantastic questions, which bring me closer to the idea of limitations. Because the question is, how do you say, how can you, pin down Marek to Poland? There are many options. You can look at affiliations in the first years of publishing, and then affiliation now meaning 2022, 2023. You can look at affiliations in the past 10 years. What we did, we know that approximately less than 10% of scientists globally really change their affiliations in terms of countries. People move mostly between institutions, but not as Hugo, or Yusuf, so much between countries. We know the numbers. It's certainly less than 10%. So generally, there is a price to be paid. We compute all affiliations lifetime from all publications, and we take the modal value, the most often occurring value. For most people, for 90% of people, it's the same country. It doesn't make a difference. For some people, it makes a difference, but following this less than 10% individually, everything is feasible. We can do anything, but it takes time. So right now, there's a proxy, lifetime affiliation in terms of country. This is the country affiliation. So the model value, if Marek publishes 99% of his publications in Poland, his affiliation in Poland. This is one of those proxies we have to use. In this big picture, there are a number of issues which we could be digging much deeper. For instance, discipline. This is another issue. Are we all after 10 years in the same discipline, or after 20 years in the same discipline? We are certainly not. So what we did, there are many approaches, but we tried this one, which is pretty sophisticated. We took, say Marek, we took all Marek's publications lifetime, and we took all Marek's self-cited references lifetime. And we combine these references with disciplines and scopus. And if this computation says Marek is in political sciences, which is social sciences, not studied here, but saying it's physics and astronomy, we define Marek as working in physics and astronomy. We could be doing it in lifetime stages, like early on, he was in social sciences. Later on, he was in political sciences. But in a large perspective, when we follow hundreds of thousands of people, it's just too complicated. So this is another proxy. This is each of us studied through their own cited references. We studied 2 billion cited references to pin down everyone in the OECD, these 4 million people, to their discipline as we see it. Well, certainly others could define disciplines differently, like using 150 subdisciplines. I would say everything is possible, but you have to start with something. It's just somehow for us a testing ground. We do productivity, we do aging, changing ages over time globally. We do productivity classes, we do attrition. somehow as a testing ground. Each of those points can be pinned down deeper and deeper and done somehow differently, possibly leading to different results, possibly. It's like gender. We say men and women, but actually the probability of those individuals being male and women is more than 85%. But it's not 100% in the Polish study. In Polish studies, it's defined by law and by the ministry in the registry, Marek, male. It's clear, two choices, male, female, and it's administratively decided. Globally, we have to use proxies. So as you can see, Jason, there are many proxies. Each of those proxies could be a separate study based on, say, Polish details and global details, and the differences between them, and what can be done and what cannot be done. What is the level of generally guessing? We guess something. For Poland, we know. Globally, we just guessed. But still, these are, I would say, informed guesses, pretty well-informed guesses. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Very common in any quantitative science, social quantitative science.
Yes,
All
indeed.
right.
Yes, indeed.
Monique, you're next, please. Your question.
Okay. Okay, thanks for your wonderful presentation. Your findings are truly fascinating. I think my question is about the future explanation. I am curious about the potential impact of the AI technology. AI technology is becoming increasingly popular and useful in today's world, and also in today's academic. So do you think that the probabilities of attrition in academic science could be reduced by the AI technology? And meanwhile, could AI technology help to lessen the gap in attrition probabilities between genders? Yes, that's it.
Yes, thank you so much. Certainly, we don't have the data yet, but we can have some informed guesses. And our feelings. Well, my feeling, not really informed, but feeling is that AI technologies, if used by most of us, do not make a big difference, except for that those highly productive can be even more productive. So the general difference is not so much between genders, but between those highly productive, and the rest can be even higher. But I'm not sure about increasing differences between men and women. So our access to technology is more or less the same. Well, we think about publications and journals. Journals are not really eager to open to any AI produced or supported publications. Everything is immediately visible. Is it individual work or is it kind of AI supported work? I strongly believe in AI work when, for instance, large-scale research is concerned. So things that we're doing for days or weeks or months can now be done much more easily. But also we need data, we need email addresses, we need individual data sets, we need to know how to combine the data, how to merge data sets. It's not an easy process. I don't expect radical changes in attrition based on an AI. If you think about publishing, well, if you think about teaching, it's a different issue. The story is not about teaching, but I can imagine heavily AI supported teaching and heavily AI supported courses and videos and all interactive dashboards for students globally. And I can imagine attrition, which I cannot measure. So we can measure it in the future with national data. Okay, so many people are just not working as teachers, as academic teachers here and there. But again, globally now, we will have some approximation from OECD, certainly OECD data about countries. It's aggregation of national level data. It is something, but at the level of individuals, we are almost unable to trace these changes right now. Yes, this is as much as I can go right now. Thank you.
I don't see any further questions in the chat. If any of you want, you can still ask some questions. If you don't mind, I will ask just two questions.
One by one, please. One by one, please.
Yes. So
Yeah.
my first question is, I noticed in your raw data that you have information about collaborations. I would expect that collaborations would be included in the logistic regression, in the sense that sometimes if women might experience a chilly climate, maybe collaborating with others might be a way to kind of overcome these more institutional constraints. Did you attempt to include collaborations in the regression? And if so, did the results change in any meaningful way? So this is number one.
Okay, number one. Okay, thank you. Collaboration. Well, we know step by step that for productivity, collaboration, and especially international collaboration is important. So when we think of attrition, which is focused on stopping publishing, we think it's important. So we included international collaboration rate in all models. We tried national collaboration rate. It doesn't. It's not statistically significant for any discipline. International collaboration is significant for some. So we have the rate for every individual. How we computed it? Again, each of us lifetime has a number of collaborative papers. They can be nationally collaborative or internationally collaborative, and the rate for us is generally from 0 to 1, and this is the share of internationally collaborative publications divided by all collaborative publications. So this is the rate, and as you can see, probably see, or as far as I remember, international collaboration is statistically significant for every discipline, but its influence is, compared with other variables, it's marginal. It is important, but it's not as important as we thought. Let me have a look at just one cohort. International collaboration rate for both cohorts is statistically important. It's not high. It's like 1%, 1 unit increase, 1% chance increasing. So if your collaboration rate is higher by 30%, looks like your chances to survive in the next year are 30% high, 30% higher. It is important, but in all disciplines, but in most disciplines, it's like 0.5, 0.6, even 0.1%. So it's marginal. Even well, comparable, we're thinking that large teams make it easier to survive in science, because we're talking only about STEM. So large teams are important. One additional person in the team increases the chances somehow. But in the all conglomerate variables with publications and with journal types, again, it's not as important as we were thinking. And gender, surprisingly, disappears in all cases. You know, being male doesn't increase the chances at all in 80% of disciplines, and in those where it matters, it lowers your chances to survive where there are a lot of women. So being man in female-dominated disciplines decreases your chances to survive generally, globally. Again, there are countries in which, for instance, pressure to publish is strong, or pressure to publish in top journals is strong. And there are other countries more relaxed. So we could be doing separate country studies as we did for Poland, as you can see in this dashboard. But globally, some roles are just disappearing in about big numbers and big numbers of observations from so many countries. So yes, international collaboration matters, but not as much as I was thinking. And this is number one, yeah.
All right, thank you. Probably I'll leave question number 2 for some other time, because I didn't notice that Svetlana had a question. I apologize for that. So I will leave the final question of the session to Svetlana.
If we have time, perfect.
All right.
Thank you, Hugo, for your kindness, and thank you, Marek, for your very insightful presentation. I have 2 questions. One is short. and very understandable because for women, because many and mostly female researchers changed their surnames due to the different obstacles, both marriage or due to provide more understandable surname for local public if these researchers mobile. So how do you consider this circumstance in your analysis? And the other question is related to maybe perspective area of your studies, because you already mentioned the issue of changing the duties in academia. So, for example, someone stops publish due to be pressured by teaching workload or administrative pressure. But there are people, for example, a vice director for research who provide an environment which motivate people to include him, it's usually he, to include him in many publications while he just administrates the field. So actually, formally, he is a researcher, but do you think it might be a prospective field of study, this usage of administrative research to stay in science? I have a lot of materials for this, and I would like to know your opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I'm always saying it's attrition in science or leaving science defined as stopping publishing. So if you don't publish for years, you disappear from science. Your question is somehow an inverted one. You don't really do research, but you are an author. Well, we know from literature, from sociology of academic careers, that is a very rare case. Publications are the only commodities which we really don't want to share like this, because it takes our time and it also supports our careers. So before we add anyone to our list of authors, we make a lot of considerations of prestige, of our chances in a given institution, of our look among colleagues and our image globally. It's not just adding authors like vice rectors of research to our publication, to our list of authors. We know it from sociology. For bottom journals, it might happen. Generally, if your, I don't know, say supervisor is a powerful guy who leaves science for a few years, we know he will come back because he was all powerful. We are still in his working group, research working group. It's somehow natural for many reasons, and we know the reasons: funding, careers. There are different reasons why we have collaborators, meaning of co-authors. We may include him or her. But overall, when we think about big numbers, hundreds and thousands of people, there's examples of vice rectors or whoever are marginal. They are so marginal that when you have 100 observations, it matters. When you have 500,000 observations, it doesn't make a difference. So this is my answer. And so we have a question: how to study administrative duties? It's hard using this type of data. It's surveys, interviews to inform decisions about surveys, and then surveys. And surveys, you need emails, possibly thousands to say something meaningful. If you have 500 observations enough. If we have 1,000 or a few thousand, it's becoming to be meaningful, but it's time consuming. I agree, it's time consuming. Please go this way if you have enough materials already, because it's just highly promising. It's different data sets. You have to produce it internally, but then you use it. So do it, please.
All right. Thank you very much. We kind of ran out of time some time ago, actually, but that's fine because it was a very interesting Q&A as well as presentation. Thank you so much, Marek, one more time for
Thank you so much.
coming here and delivering these very interesting big data, definitely the future and the present and the future of this kind of analysis. Thank you also for the audience, and thank you for all of you that asked questions. We will be seeing soon for the next share seminar that Ross already advertised in the chat. So thank you very much. Have a good evening, or Marek, in your case, have a nice afternoon.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Hugo, and see you soon. Now I'm delighted. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care. Thank you.
因为这梨啊，那个车就在那儿放着，他就不拿走。